Hey guys, it's County in my review for Madam Web. And this film, it takes place in 2003 for some reason. I really don't understand why, especially based on decisions made, but we'll get to that later. Anyway, we focus on Cassandra Webb in this movie. She is this paramedic of sorts, and she ends up going through this accident, and after doing so, she finds herself coming out with new special abilities to predict the future, but also maybe has the power to stop events from happening, and one day ends up having this premonition of these three young girls who are being chased by this character Ezekiel Sims, and Cassandra makes it her sworn duty to protect these girls and do whatever she can to prevent this incident from happening. So, Madam Web. Look, I'll get the elephant out of the room right away. I was not very excited for this film, and I really wanted to be. You have some very considerable talent here. I think the premise is actually very interesting to this movie and things like that, but what really was holding it back for me is the fact that this is yet another movie by Sony, and them trying to continue to make these movies about Spider-Man villains, but not really have them be villains, have them be more anti-heroes than anything. They've done it with Venom. They did it with, and that didn't work out. They did it with Morbius, and that really didn't work out, and I really just didn't know how this one was going to be. And then the first trailer came out, and that pretty much, completely sunk any hope I had for this movie. It just looked so incredibly poor and cheap and generic, and it just didn't really feel like any care was put into this film, and I was really hoping that it was just going to be a case of bad marketing, that this could be one of the few bright spots from Sony. This could be the rare one that actually ends up working out for them, and it sucks. But, I mean, I feel like you already know that. Everyone has been trashing on this movie recently, and unfortunately, it's deserved. And I hate to be another person to just continue to, beat the drum of Madam Web is terrible, but unfortunately, that is the case with this film. It is easily one of the most incompetent and just poorly put together superhero films I have seen in a very long time, but we are getting into right now, starting off with the cast here. And it's very hard to talk about the cast because I really do like every actor that's in this movie. I've seen all of them in projects, and they've been really good before, and they've shown their talent, and, I think all of them are very talented individuals. I think all of them can shine when they have the right material. But again, emphasis on the right material, because this is very much not. And as a result, a lot of these actors just don't really end up working for me. Let's talk about Dakota Johnson, who, look, she has very publicly stated that she was not happy with how this film turned out, and really has just been so, disgruntled and just very sort of apathetic to anything going on with this movie whatsoever, has had this not give a fuck type attitude. And so I think going into this, already, I wasn't really expecting that much from her. And here's the thing, there are definitely moments that do work when it comes to this character. Cassandra is someone who is very odd, especially when she becomes this clairvoyant of sorts. A lot of people don't really understand her. She has some very interesting sort of mannerisms. She's a very awkward character and things like that. And I think when Johnson leans into that, it does kind of work. But for every moment that works, there are moments where it just seems like she's not really into this. She's not really feeling this performance at all, and as a result, just does not put the fullest of effort into it. Anytime this character has to emote, especially, it just feels off. It doesn't feel like Johnson's heart is in this role, and it really just ends up sinking so much of this film. And like I said, I do think that Johnson is a very talented actor. I just really think she was not into this project whatsoever, and didn't know how to hide it. She didn't know how to hide her utter disdain, her utter annoyance with how this turned out, and as a result, she just didn't really put her fullest of effort into this. She just really didn't do a great job of, showcasing her true abilities, and I think as a result, this is really just not that strong of a performance from her. It's not terrible, I do think there are moments that do work, but a highlight of this film, I really can't say that either. I think overall, she just really wasn't that great in this movie. I was hoping that she could be one of the few highlights here, but she really didn't end up working out. And the same goes for the three girls in this movie. As much as I enjoy all three of them, I just didn't really buy into their performances. Sydney Sweeney, I think, is generally one of the best actresses working today. Everything I see her in, she's always a bright spot of it. She always brings so much energy to every role that she ends up taking on. But here, I just didn't really fully buy into the character that she was playing. She's supposed to be this like awkward, nerdy girl, and it just doesn't really end up working out. She's not really given that much to do. We'll get into that when it comes to the script, but she doesn't really find a way to elevate it. It feels like Sweeney is confused by the material. It feels like she is not really sure how to go about playing this character. Once in a while, she has a line that does work, but overall, I didn't really feel she was that great here. And then Celeste O'Connor, I think, is fine in this movie. We'll get to the character that they're playing in a little bit. I do think that they are also a very talented actor, but they didn't really do that much. Isabela Merced was really the only one of the three girls that generally did impress me. I thought her performance was actually pretty good here. I did enjoy what she ended up doing in this film. We'll again get to her character a little bit, but I do think overall she brought at least a little bit more effort to this movie than some of the other actors were, and I thought that she did an alright job. But easily, I think the best performance in this film comes from surprisingly someone who hasn't really been promoted that much in the film, and that is Adam Scott, who does play the character of Ben Parker in this movie. He is Cassie's friend in this movie. I thought the two of them had a genuine bond that actually did work really well, but also felt like he actually elevated the material. You buy into Adam Scott in this film, you buy into the performance that he is giving, and I thought he was really the only one that was generally consistent in this movie. I liked what he was doing here. Unfortunately, the rest of the performances here really are not great. Emma Roberts really does not have that much to do here. It's not a shock that she's in this movie. She was rumored to be in this movie. I was not a fan of her performance here. Like Epps, it very much is not great, but the worst offender of them all, the person that absolutely sinks any sort of semblance of competence this film had going for it, is Tahar Rahim as Ezekiel Sims, who, listen, I've seen him be good before. I have seen him give strong performances in movies. Hell, he literally just came off of a Golden Globe nomination in The Mauritanian just a couple years ago. He's a very talented actor. Here, I don't know what ended up happening, whether they just were not convinced by the performance that he was giving, or whether he just, again, was not into the material, but nearly every line that he has in this movie is awful. The best way to describe him in this movie is, you know, when you watch like an English dub of a foreign film and everything just sounds kind of weird and off, and it doesn't sound like a human being is speaking. It sounds like someone is just recording dialogue and it doesn't feel natural at all. That's the best way to describe his performance in this movie. It is so incredibly jarring. Every line of dialogue just completely takes you out of the movie. His performance here is so unconvincing. I really just don't know what happened here. Whether he was just giving a really bad performance and they wanted to re-record all his dialogue and redo the entire character, or if Tahar Rahim just wasn't the right casting for this film. I really can't tell you whatsoever, but my god, this is just such a just atrocious performance all around. It's easily one of the worst performances by a villain in a comic book movie I have seen in a very long time. The last Sony film that I talked about, Morbius, the villain actually elevated the film. This one, it completely sinks the film, and Tahar Rahim is easily the worst offense of it. Like I said, a lot of the acting in this movie really isn't that great. There's some good actors in this film, and the majority of them don't seem in the material. Rahim is easily the worst offense of it, and honestly, unfortunately, the acting does not really end up saving this film all that much. But as unconvincing and stale as the majority of the performances are, believe me, we have barely even scratched the surface when it comes to just how much of an atrocity this film really is. With that said, let's get to the directing here. S.J. Clarkson, who, I gotta say, I don't know if I fully fault her for this film. In a way, I do, because it doesn't feel like she brought anything to the table whatsoever. It didn't really feel like she really gave any sort of style to this film, but I also question, was she originally attached to this project, or did they just need a name? Did they just attach her to this movie because they needed somebody to credit as the director of this movie? It's very hard to tell, because this movie does not have a style whatsoever. It doesn't really know what it wants to be. 1 second, it is this sort of character study about Cassandra Webb and her dealing with these powers and things like that, but also trying to dive deeper into like her past and how that really is affecting her. And then the next second, it is the most like campy, over-the-top superhero film that you've ever seen, with characters spouting the most ridiculous dialogue, with the most ridiculous and illogical situations happening. So it's very hard to tell if it actually was supposed to be a style here. Was Clarkson into this? But regardless, it doesn't feel like there is any sort of vision here. It doesn't feel like there is any sort of, you know, feel to this movie. And so it's very hard to even talk about her as a director because it barely even feels like it has one. So, I mean, I guess it's really bad directing all around, but at the same time, it's kind of like the Disney live action remakes where I question, is this really her fault, or did the studio just intervene so much that the movie felt so far removed from her original vision? But at the same time, I can't really tell you what her original vision was. It's generally hard to tell with this movie. Like, what was it trying to be? What was this movie trying to do? I really can't tell you. And so because that, her directing just completely falls flat in this film, does the film absolutely no favors, but easily the worst element of this entire movie comes from the screenplay here, which, look, there's about 4 different writers attached to this movie, and it really does show. This generally does feel like a movie that they just had no idea what they actually wanted to do with. In fact, if you read the plot to this film and what it was initially pitched as when the film was greenlit, it is completely dissimilar from the movie we actually got. The plot to this movie, and I'll pull it up right here, basically the 3 girls and Cassandra were going to help May Parker, basically, like, save May Parker. She's going into labor, with Peter Parker, and Ezekiel Sims is trying to kill her, and they're trying to prevent this from happening. That he wants to make sure that Peter Parker is never born, and they're trying to do what they can to save her, and that sounds infinitely more interesting. That is a time-sensitive mission. You have a genuine goal that you need to achieve. You find a way to make all these characters fit within this story, and in general, it just feels so much more interesting. It feels like you've streamlined this story in a way where, we feel like we're getting something out of all these characters. There's a genuine mission for them to go on. There is a genuine sense of stakes. And I think that actually sounds like it really could work. Unfortunately, what I just told you that plot has nothing to do with what this movie is actually about. What the movie is actually about is something far more laughable than that. Let's first talk about the way they deal with Cassandra's powers in this movie, because at first, I won't lie, the first 20-ish minutes, I was like, okay, this isn't the worst thing ever. I definitely can see some potential of what they're trying to do. They dive a little bit into, what this means for her character with her having these powers and her trying to, stop certain events from happening. It can be done in a very silly manner, but at least the film is doing something. It's trying to dive into, what this really means for her. How is she able to hone her craft and help people? I thought that was interesting. We have a genuine bond with Ben Parker in this movie. I thought the two of them worked really well together here. Like I said, I thought that the conflict that her character was going through of Cassie, I didn't think was a bad one in this film. It felt kind of underwritten. It didn't really feel like they dived deep enough into it, but I at least felt like, okay, there's something interesting going on here. Once the 3 girls appear in this movie, this film loses basically all sense of structure, all sense of momentum just goes out the fucking window in this film, and the movie just really never recovers from there. I mean, one of the biggest problems with this movie easily is that the 3 girls that we see in this movie, there's really no reason for Cassie to be involved in this story. There's no reason for her to generally care about what's going on. She has minimal interactions with all 3 of them, but it's not significant in a way where you understand why she wants to save them, why she needs to prevent this from happening, other than she's just generally trying to help people, and she's generally trying to take take it upon herself to do it. And that's just not strong enough of a reasoning for me. We needed to see more moments with her interacting with these characters for it to really work, and it just never really does. The movie is so contingent upon you caring about their relationship in this movie, and I just never really did. I never really felt like the four of them had a genuine bond. I never really felt like the four of them, brought something out of each other. The movie wants so badly to be like a Guardians of the Galaxy, or hell, even like Dungeons and Dragons last year. It very much wants to be like one of those movies where like it's focusing on like a chosen family, but it doesn't recognize what really works with that. Each of these characters, they're kind of going through something, but again, it's very minimalistic. Sydney Sweeney's character, she's dealing with something with her father. I can't even remember really what it was, but it was so incredibly brief that I didn't really feel like they got a chance to dive into it. There's a scene in the car where it seems like she is going to tell us more about what she's going through, but then Celeste O'Connor's character was like, oh, nobody cares about your backstory, and I'm like, yes, the fuck they do. What do you mean? Like, I want to see more about this character. I want to see more of what she's going through. I want to feel connected to her, and you are actively, keeping me from doing so, and that was so incredibly frustrating, and that's not the only time that happens within this movie. There's a scene where these three girls are in the woods, and it seems like there's an opportunity to flesh out their characters a bit more, and then we get the most random piece of information from Sydney Sweeney about her knowing Taekwondo, and that never really comes back around at all. Celeste O'Connor's character in this film, the character that they are playing of Maddie in this movie, her entire character is just that she's hungry and she wants to eat something, and she's so incredibly annoying in this movie. And I get it that she's supposed to be the comedic relief, but my god, I could not stand her in this film. She's supposed to be this like just very sarcastic and just annoying character, but it doesn't come across as like endearing. It just comes across as annoying and just really weighing the movie down, and it felt like they had an opportunity to dive deep into what she was going through, but they really didn't do that. Again, we hear a little bit about her parents being absent, but there just isn't really enough there. Isabela Merced, like I said, is really the only one that I felt somewhat connected to. Her character actually did have some potential. There's a really good scene in the beginning of the movie where you kind of see what she's going through, and I thought, okay, this is actually pretty good. The movie is doing something it doesn't do a lot of the time in doing this show not tell, and it actually is showing me, what she's going through, and she starts to open up a bit more about it. I'm like, okay, let's see what happens, and then you see where it goes with it, and the answer is it goes absolutely nowhere with it. It's like, why did you even introduce these elements? Why did you even introduce these storylines if you weren't going to do jack shit with it? Did you just like realize you had nothing going on with these characters? You had nothing really to latch onto with them, so instead you just didn't give them anything? Because that's what it feels like. It feels like they didn't even try with these characters. They didn't even try to get you connected to them. So again, I never really felt that bond. I never really felt like these four were connected. By the end of the movie, when they're suddenly being this chosen family after literally all they have done is bond over, some traumatic elements of their life and then learn how to do CPR, I'm supposed to feel like they're a family now? No, it's so stupid. I don't feel convinced by that whatsoever. The movie feels so incredibly underwritten in that regard, and it really does not end up working. The worst part of this entire movie, which there's a lot of things about this movie that really don't work, but Ezekiel Sims may just be the worst element of this entire film, because not only is this a villain that is so extremely underwritten, remember, the movie's supposed to take place in 2003, yet he has this whole, like, surveillance crew and things like that. He has all this access to, like, these three girls and them, him hunting them down. He has all this technology that I don't even think exists now, and you're constantly questioning, how do you have access to this? How did this happen? How are you able to devise this? There's no explanation whatsoever. We don't know anything about who he is outside of just being evil, pretty much. He's got, like, I guess some story going on with, like, his father, but again, it is the most surface level of character development. There really is nothing to him whatsoever, but his motivation in this movie, Oh my god, it is laughably stupid in this movie. So, in the film, you think that the movie is going to be that he is going after Cassie because of what happened with her mother. We hear in the trailer something about, oh, she was in the Amazon, he was in the Amazon, hunting spiders with my mom before she died. Whatever the line was everyone was talking about. Not in the movie, by the way. They did not keep that line in the movie, so if you were excited to hear that, you're going to be disappointed. It is not in the film whatsoever. And I thought that was going to be his motivation, is that he is ultimately trying to get to her. He is trying to, he's trying to stop her from what she's doing. But for some reason, that's not his motivation. Instead, he is fixated on these three girls. And the reasoning he is fixated on them is the most laughable, unconvincing, fucking nonsensical motivation of a villain I've seen in such a long time. I shit you not. The reasoning he is going after them is because he has a vision very early on in the movie of something that these three are going to do later on when they're adults, and he now wants to kill them because of it. I wish I was joking. I generally wish I was joking, but that is literally his motivation in this movie. These three girls that he has never met before, he's never interacted with, doesn't even know how they're going to get superpowers, doesn't even know why they're going to do this, just immediately wants to kill them. He doesn't really care why it's happening. He just wants them dead whatsoever. He doesn't want to try to prevent this from happening. He doesn't try to look deeper into why are they coming after me. He just wants them dead. And that is literally his only motivation throughout the entire movie. And it feels one of those things that was rewritten at the last second. Because like I said, the majority of his dialogue is ADR. The majority of his dialogue, it's either you hear his lips moving, but it's not syncing with what he is saying, or they do this like weird thing where they only show like the back of his head, or they turn his head like, not like that, but like this almost, to where you can barely even see what he's saying. It's so weird the way they decide to go about writing this character, and I don't really know what happened. Like I said, was he supposed to be this way from the beginning, or did they just suddenly change motivations because whatever they were trying to do wasn't working? They didn't feel that it was convincing. I can't believe this is the one that they originally had. And if this is the one they went through, I don't understand why they thought this was acceptable. I don't understand why they thought this was a good idea for a motivation for a villain, but it is so incredibly stupid. And I could not believe what I was seeing. I could not believe where they ended up going with him. And then again, there's no explanation to, how he is the way he is or why he's doing what he's doing. There's no explanation whatsoever other than he just wants to kill them because of some fucking vision he has that might not even happen. We don't even know when this is going to happen or what the context of it is. So again, oh my god, it really just ended up taking me out of the movie significantly, but also just left me so incredibly baffled. I could not believe that this is the direction they went with this character, and it was just so incredibly stupid. I'm also not even 100% sure if the ADR is even his voice, because the whole movie he's talking like this, and he's doing this voice the entire time, and it just feels very unnatural and forced, and it's like so hard to take seriously. Like, literally every time, like, the film is already bad. Like, don't get me wrong, it already is bad. Every time he comes on screen, it is 100% worse. Like, you will have a scene going on that's not super engaging, and then all of a sudden he comes on, he just starts doing this voice, and he starts talking about how annoyed he is with these fucking teenagers he hasn't met before and wanting to take them down because they're gonna destroy everything from him, even though, again, I have no idea, like, what is at stake here? What are you worried about aside from you dying? Like, it's so stupid. It's so stupid, and I really just don't know what the hell is going on. I don't know who read this script and heard him doing this voice and heard this and didn't feel like maybe that might take people out of the movie, but yet they kept it in. So yeah, I don't even know anymore. So yeah, that easily I think is the worst thing about this entire film. The other thing that's really annoying about this movie is that one of the biggest selling points, I think, of that trailer is this sequence of these three girls and them suiting up in these costumes, which I generally do like. I will say, I don't think the costumes costumes are bad whatsoever. I actually think it's one of the things that is generally well done. You can tell that they're like practical suits and things like that, so I don't have any issue on the costumes whatsoever. What I do have an issue with is them promoting this in the trailer and that being pretty much relegated to, I don't know, like 30 seconds of the movie. I'm not even joking. The only instances we get of them in these costumes is that dream sequence I talked about with Ezekiel Sims, and then something towards the end of the movie. Like, that's literally it. That's all you get of them in these costumes, and it's like, why even put that in there? Why? Because the actors liked wearing them? I mean, we've heard a lot about how Sydney Sweeney enjoyed her costume a lot and was really excited to wear it, but she barely even gets to in this movie. You get like a quick sequence with her and then that's it. It's like, what an incredible waste of talent. What an incredible waste of, what honestly is very well put together costumes here. I don't even understand what the fuck they were thinking. Like, why did you decide to even do this? Like, why not at least have them like experiment with their powers or anything like that? Like, just give them literally anything other than this, oh, I'm gonna dive into my backstory. No, we don't want to hear that right now. It's like, oh my god, like, what are they even doing with these characters? I generally just don't understand it. I really just don't get what they were trying to do whatsoever here. But that's not the only thing that hurts this movie. The dialogue in this movie is mostly atrocious. Even when these characters are reading these lines and not doing it in a convincing way, I don't really blame them because the screenplay that they're dealing with is so incredibly poor. There's so many choices here that just don't make any sense. People have already talked about how there is a sequence in this movie where Cassie tells them to hide in the woods, and then instead of them just deciding to hide, go off the grid, they instead decide to go to this bar and start dancing on tables to Britney Spears, which was just, what the hell is going on? Like, how did we even get here? What human is going to make that decision? It just does not make sense whatsoever. But the thing that pisses me off the most with this movie, aside from many other, amongst many other things in this movie, is the way it decides to connect to Spider-Man. Because Sony has always done this thing where it's like, we're going to be connected to the Marvel films, but we can't really directly reference them. We can't really show any of the characters, aside from, I guess, showing Michael Keaton at the end of the movie for a few minutes. We can't really do much else than that. And I thought here they had an opportunity to actually find a way to make this work. You have Ben Parker in this movie. You have Mary Parker here. There's something you can do with that. And what did they decide to do? Literally nothing. Ben Parker, there's a scene in this movie where he's talking to Cassie early on about some girl that he met, and she's like, oh, I want to know more I want to know what her name is, and he literally doesn't tell her. And tells her, like, oh, he just doesn't say it whatsoever. He doesn't, like, hint at it. He doesn't try to speculate what her name is. He just doesn't tell her. And that alone should tell you that they can't reference certain things in this movie. They clearly are trying to bait you into thinking they're going to say something, and then they don't. But probably the worst defense of this whatsoever is a scene at Mary Parker's house, who, completely pointless character. Like, literally has no reason to be in this movie whatsoever. I generally think the only reason that she's here is because she was supposed to have a significant role in this film, but they reworked the entire thing and now they don't know what the fuck to do with her. So she's just in this movie for God knows why, honestly. Like, I don't even understand what she's doing in this film at this point. But there is a sequence in which Cassie goes to a baby shower and people start questioning, and asking Mary what is the name of her baby. And we obviously know what the name of her baby is. We know what she's going to say. And there's a point where it seems like she's going to say it. And then we just hear a sound and they completely cut out what she was going to say. And it's just like, I know what you're doing. They're very clearly trying to, get the audience to be like, oh my God, they didn't say the thing that I wanted them to say, but oh my God, how clever. And it's like, no, you're not being clever. You're just avoiding any sort of continuity whatsoever. And you're literally just doing this to get people talking. Like, that's the only reason you're doing this. That's the only reason they did the Michael Keaton thing in Morbius. That's the only reason they did the post-credit scene at the end of Venom 2. It literally is just to get people excited. It literally is just to make these films seem more special than they are. Make them feel like they have a direct continuity to the universe, but yet you don't do anything. When you don't do anything interesting with that, what even is the point? Are you just referencing these things to reference them? It's so incredibly incredibly lazy, and I could not believe they decided to stick with that. That was easily something they could have cut out of this movie. That was easily something that they could have changed. And here's the thing, Sony's been notorious for this. Going back to the Amazing Spider-Man films, they did the same thing. You know, they had the "with great power comes great responsibility" line, but they didn't actually say it. This is even worse than that, because you're not even trying to say, you're not even trying to attempt anything. You're just inserting these things and not doing a damn thing about it. So, like, what even is the point? As much as I enjoy Adam Scott in this movie, his character has no purpose whatsoever. He's literally just Cassie's friend. Like, that's all he does in this movie. And Mary Parker is just, she's pregnant. That's it. She's pregnant. That there's nothing to do with her. Like, there's nothing for either of these characters to do in this movie, and I don't understand why they even kept them in this film. It just feels like they needed to find a purpose for them, and they're just like, who cares? We like these actors, let's just keep them here. And it's like, no, you gotta do something with them. You can't just have characters in a movie and just not do anything, especially when those characters are Ben and Mary Parker. Those are legitimate names, though. That's something that is important, and if you're gonna try to connect this, you gotta do it in a way that makes sense. And by the way they go in this movie, I'm generally confused about the timeline in this Sony universe. Why is this set in 2003 when it seems like they're trying to connect to the Marvel films? Are you trying to say that, like, the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man is, like, the definitive one? Are you trying... Hell, I read an article on Twitter that said they originally were going to try to connect this to the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man and then realize, oh, wait, that doesn't work. That doesn't make sense with the timeline. So I have to assume they legitimately didn't know what they were doing in this movie. Like, it just feels like they're making things up on the fly. And it doesn't seem like a huge deal because it only is a couple scenes. But you think about how those couple scenes could have been used to develop these characters. Those couple scenes could have been used to give Ezekiel motivation. Those couple scenes could have been used to dive deeper into Cassie's past. To also, let me just say, we barely get anything with her past in this movie. The entire, whole thing of who her mother was in the Amazon with, I mean, it's important for sure. Like, we get the answer to that, like, literally in the first scene in this movie. But then why is there a scene in this movie where Cassie decides to have this random, exposition of everything that she's been through when we already know why this all happened? We already know why they decided to do this. So again, it's just the movie is so incredibly disjointed in terms of its screenplay. There's so many things that don't end up working here, and it's easily the thing I think that brings this film down the most. The cinematography in this film is predictably also terrible, just like the majority of these Sony films. Nothing looks real in this movie. Nothing looks natural. Everything just looks really fake and artificial. The CGI is incredibly unconvincing in this movie, but there's also, like, not that much of it. Like, that's the thing. I would barely even say this is a comic book movie. I mean, the three teens, like I said, they don't have their powers yet. They're not even superheroes yet. Cassie doesn't even become a clairvoyant until literally, like, I don't know, 30, 40 minutes into this film. Before that, it's just like a regular story. Like, it's barely even a comic book movie, so there really isn't even much to say in regards to, like, the effects and the CGI. Yes, it's terrible, but I feel like that's kind of expected at this point. And that's not to say, like, it's excusable. Like, it's inexcusable for sure. I don't understand why they haven't even tried to fix it. But yeah, it's still terrible in this movie, and there's really no attempt whatsoever to try to do it better. The action sequences here also are really not great. There's also really not that many of them. There's only like 2 or 3 action scenes in the entire movie, and that's not really like a huge issue. I mean, Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 last year only had a couple action set pieces, and that really worked because the ones that they did really did stick out. But the problem is here, the action sequences they have, they don't stick out at all. They feel so incredibly just forgettable and generic and poorly conceived. Especially the climax of this movie. Oh my god, like the directions they go with the climax, the movie basically turns into like a Fast and Furious movie. Like, all laws of physics are just out the window. Any sort of like peril these characters were in, you can't take it seriously anymore. Just where they end up going, I generally couldn't believe. The way things are resolved as well. Oh my god, like, how did anybody come up with this and think, oh, that's a good way to resolve this conflict? That's a good way to wrap this up. I could not believe they went in the directions that they did. So yeah, the cinematography is awful. The 2000 setting as well really never serves much of a purpose in this film. There's never a reason as to why this needs to be set in the early 2000s. You don't even feel like they fully committed to it because, like I said, the technology that they're using sometimes, it doesn't feel like something that would have been around then. It doesn't feel like something that would even be possible then, something that would even be conceived back then. So it doesn't really make much sense. Like, why even set it in the early 2000s if you're not even going to fully commit to it, aside from just like having a backdrop, having familiar music, familiar like settings and things like that? You got to do more than just that. Like, it can't just be an aesthetic. You really have to find a way to integrate it into these films, and they really didn't find a way to do that. I felt them setting it in 2000, maybe they could have found a way for this to stick out, and they don't even try with that. Like, aside, like I said, from like a few needle drops and a couple references here and there's like a really random reference about like Martha Stewart and things like that. It just feels like they were doing that just to be like, yeah, remember, it's the 2000s, like kind of beating you over the head with it. And it just really, like, they either are beating you over the head with it or forget that they're in the 2000s. Like, there's no middle ground whatsoever, and it's just an all-around just really poorly thought out choice whatsoever. The editing also is really bad here. The movie's so incredibly fast paced, but it's not done in a way to where, okay, this feels like, it's very breezy. This feels like it's paced very well. No, it feels way too rushed. It doesn't feel like any conflict is played out to its fullest. Like I said, it never feels like anything is fully developed enough, and it just feels like everything is so incredibly half-baked, and that really leads me to believe that there was some genuine studio tampering going on with this film, which I don't think is something that's like hard to buy into whatsoever. I think it's very easy to assume that they did not like the way this movie was going. They cut out a bunch of stuff, and as a result, the movie just feels like such a jumbled mess from one scene to the next. There's so many moments in this movie where it's like, how do we get from point A to point B? And they really never explain it whatsoever, so the editing's just really bad here. Like I said, I already talked about how laughable the ending is. Yeah, overall, Madam Web is just a complete and utter embarrassment of a film. It has actors that are very talented, but really don't give a shit whatsoever. Aside from Adam Scott, the only person putting genuine effort into this movie, it has some alright ideas here and there, but it never really dives deeper into them. It never really finds a way to flesh them out in a way that feels significant. It has a villain that is so incredibly laughable and one-note and easily one of the worst I've ever seen in a comic book movie. Listen, I get that they are clearly wanted to do something different here. They wanted to tell this, interesting story about this clairvoyance and things like that, but they barely even scratch the surface with it. After a while, they really just don't do all that much with it. The three girls that are in this movie are nothing more than just plot devices. They don't really dive into them in any way that is significant. And it's all helmed by such a incredibly laughable and just horribly thought out script where I generally don't know what anyone was really thinking. Listen, it was an interesting idea to set Madam Web in the early 2000s, but this film really just feels like it is setting us back to that era when they just didn't know how to construct a comic book movie, when they just didn't know how to properly write one. How do you adapt these characters? How do you tell the story? How do you have convincing dialogue? It doesn't feel like any of that was put into this film. Maybe at some point there was a version of Madam Web that was workable. Maybe at some point there was a version of this film that felt like it had a style, it had a vision. The one that we are saddled with has basically almost none of that. It has been completely just stripped of any sort of feel and vision, any sort of interesting, ideas that it had has been completely thrown out the window, and instead we have one of the most poorly thought out, one of the most baffling, ill-conceived superhero films I have seen in a very long time. It has no idea what it wants to be. It has references to things, but it never wants to do anything interesting with them. It just has the references to have references. There are scenes here of characters doing things that I would have really liked to see, but we never really dive deep into any of it. Overall, this film is just pretty much a complete and utter colossal failure from beginning to end. There's barely anything to really recommend about this one. I don't know what the fuck is going on with Sony, but like a reevaluation of sorts needs to happen. I don't know what it's going to take for them to do that, but there's no possible way they can move forward with these films with the way this has turned out. I very much worry for what the hell Kraven the Hunter is going to be. I know we have to wait till August for that, but my god, I feel like that film is going to be a very rough one to get through. I don't know what the step is, but there has to be a way. They cannot keep making these horrible films. There's just no possible way they have a future moving forward with this movie. I really wanted to like this a lot. I like a lot of the actors that are involved in this, but unfortunately this movie was just such a utter disaster from start to finish. There's barely anything about this movie that I really can recommend. It is easily one of the worst of its kind I have seen in a very long time. So with all that said, Madam Web does get a D. Oh my god, I have not, I think, gone that hard on a movie in a very long time, and it honestly felt kind of cathartic to do so, because, listen, sometimes you just can't really hold back, and this is one of those times where I just kind of had to do that with this movie. Yeah, this is just such a utter disaster of a film. I'm not surprised at all to see that it is just completely falling flat on its face, like, box office-wise. Nobody's going to see it. Nobody really cares about it. Yes, I think Sony was trying to kind of replicate Morbius, where they were trying to have this, like, meme-type marketing, but as we've seen, that can really only take you so far. People want to see quality films, and this is very much not that. But other than that, guys, this is my review of Madam Web. Let me know what you guys saw of this movie. All left your thoughts in it. What the hell do you think even happened with this movie? Like, generally, I would love to know that. But that's it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. We'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.